By now, everyone is familiar with the back and forth that the United States and North Korean governments perform towards each other. Each likes to tout that it's superior to the other. Each likes to say that it's the best place to live on Earth. Each one likes to say that they have all the answers. Each one says that it takes the best care of its people. Each one says that it is totally prepared to go to war if it has to. And both have nuclear weapons. And they have been going back and forth with the nuclear arms demonstrations for decades. Now, if we hadn't intervened over there in 1950 all the way through 1953, North Korea might be very different today. Because after 1953, that's when the Soviet Union introduced the North Korean people to Kim Il-sung, who was basically the president up until 1994. And it was in the early 90s that North Korea started to go through a famine. And when he died, his successor, Kim Jong-il, took over, who was still at that point the general secretary. And Kim Il-sung was still the president, and is still so today by North Korean law. And then, when Kim Jong-il passed away in 2011, you have Kim Jong-un, the son of Kim Jong-il, who took over in 2011, who was the supreme leader, who was under the general secretary, and remains so to this day, even though he is acting as the dictator of the country. Even though, on paper, Kim Il-sung is still the dictator. That doesn't make a lot of sense, right? At least not to us. You know, it's kind of interesting, really, when you think about it, how much North Korea and the United States actually have in common. You know, I put these side by side, and I see so many similarities between a communist dictatorship and a government of late-stage capitalism. They both have the same goal, but when you put the North Korean and American government side by side, the way by which they manage their status quos is literally night and day. The North Korean government uses militarism and force and propaganda and forced participation in the worshipping of the Kim dynasty. So they do it, in a much more strongman dictatorial approach, whereas the United States tends to be a lot more, soft fascistic, if I can think of a better term, I'll let you know, but I'm kind of stuck on words at the moment. But they basically use, of course, propaganda, they use the education system, they use entertainment, they use pats on the head, placation, and gaslighting, among other tactics. So it's a softer form of trying to crush dissent. Whereas, of course, in North Korea, if you dissent and you're caught, you're likely either sent to a labor camp or executed. I mean, that's not happening here, at least not yet. The unfortunate thing is, when you really look at the North Korean regime and the far-right extremists in this country, they actually are advocating for something a lot like what the North Koreans have. A strongman dictatorship, rule by force and might, and no room for dissent. It's incredible. And yet they say they believe in freedom and democracy. And what's crazy here is that both factions in the United States and in North Korea who follow these types of people, the MAGA cultists, the North Korean loyal to the Kim dynasty, they both think they're free. They both think they represent freedom and liberty. They both think they represent the best way of living on earth. They both think that force of might is the way to quell dissent, which basically means they don't believe in democracy. Which, when you really look at it, the critics of the United States, particularly China and Russia, have pointed this out recently. North Korea has every reason to as well, that the United States government really doesn't believe in democracy. It really doesn't. It just cares about the next fistful of dollars that each representative can stuff into their own pockets. But you know something? That also happens in the North Korean government. So the communist arrangement that they have over there and the capitalist arrangement we have in the United States have striking similarities. Because both countries have upper classes of rich and powerful people that they want to keep in those positions. And they use the law and they use whatever institutions that are in the country in order to do that. It's remarkable. It really is. And the people of North Korea, they want out of this toxic relationship that they have, but they don't know how to get out of it. They don't have guns over there. They don't have the might to stand up to the Kim regime. In this country, on the other hand, We have rich and powerful people that use the system, use the institutions, use the law and propaganda, entertainment, the education system, you get the point, to crush dissent, to keep people brainwashed and ignorant of what is possible and could be better for them moving forward. Because they know that if democracy were to ever take hold in the United States, just as the North Korean regime realizes that if real democracy were to happen over there, then that negatively affects their bottom line. Less money means less power, means less dominance over the little guy. That's why that's why I say it's remarkable how both governments suppress its people. It suppresses democracy. It's just the differences in how they do it. But ultimately the goal is the same. And both the North Korean people and the American people want out of their respective toxic relationships. But like I said, North Korea doesn't have the guns in the hands of the people. America is swimming in guns like Scrooge McDuck in his money bin. I said that in a previous segment. So, I hope it doesn't come to that in this country. In this country you have people screaming about a civil war, which is, silly to say the least. And then over North Korea, some of them may want to, but if they do, they're going to get sent to a labor camp where they could easily, suffer and die over there. So we have a lot more in common than we think with our North Korean neighbors. And by neighbors, I mean on this earth. But it is the U.S. that's responsible for them being in the situation that they're in right now. So, I think we do need to be listening to the North Korean people. But I also think that we need to really take with a grain of salt what we see from our own media, what we see in our entertainment, what we see from anybody who has any thoughts about the country who's never been there before. In fact, the only one that I'm aware of who's ever been to North Korea was Dennis Rodman. That was a little while ago, so I know I'm a little late to the party on that, but very few Americans have ever entered North Korea. So, and even the stuff that we get out of them can only be construed as anecdotal because their interpretation was so limited. We've had foreigners from other countries go on holiday, on vacation in North Korea, if you can even imagine something like that, where they have actually had to have a military escort at all times outside of their hotel rooms. That is a thing that happens over there. And it's because, of course, they don't want anybody to see what goes on in the rest of the country because it's an incredibly horrible situation. But that said, North Korea represents the extreme example of big government going too far. Now, what's going on in the United States right now is private industry titans and executives, shareholders, the entrepreneurs who just want more money in their pockets. They are the ones who are rigging the system in our country. And they are the ones pulling the strings of elected politicians to make sure that money keeps flowing into their pockets. It's a slightly different scenario than over in North Korea. Because the wealth, the capital, is concentrated in North Korea among the political and military apparatus. It's much more spread out here in the United States, but we only have 1% of the population, that's why we call them the 1%, who own the bulk of the wealth in the country now. So the social contract by force of circumstance is fundamentally the same. The difference is in North Korea, the oppression's coming from the military and the political apparatus. In the United States, it's coming from the private sector. It's coming from the financial sector, from the people who accumulate capital in a free market. So either way, you go to capitalism, you go to communism, it doesn't matter. You will ultimately end up with the exact same social circumstance of a strong dictatorial body ruling over the masses. That's why the United States needs to take a hard look at itself and rethink its allegiance to capitalism. And while North Korea certainly needs out of their communist dictatorship, and they want out badly, I don't think going into a laissez-faire capitalist system would be the ideal scenario for them either, because they could easily wind up in the same situation they're in right now. But both countries are a lot more alike than we think, and I think we need to be, trying to learn more about North Korea. We need to be seeing what we can do to help those people without resorting to military action, of course. And I just want to add this. North Korea would have no reason to fear the United States if we weren't going around the world toppling governments, stealing people's resources, enslaving other people for slave labor. Because the Kim dynasty, Kim Jong-un saw what we did to Gaddafi in Libya. We said, give up your weapons and we won't hurt you. He gave up the weapons. What happened? We went in there and toppled him anyway. So North Korea is being incredibly smart by not giving up its nuclear program. Now, said that, they wouldn't need a nuclear program if the U.S. hadn't gotten the atomic bomb in the first place. That's why I keep saying, nuclear proliferation is not only preferable but necessary for the survival of humanity. But it should be the United States that leads the way, not North Korea. They only got their nuclear weapon in response to us having one. That's why they have it. And they're not going to give it up as long as we're going around the world toppling governments. And they shouldn't. We need to do it first. Now, that also means we should retain the ability to shoot down nuclear weapons from other countries. But we do need to get rid of the offensive nuclear arsenal in our country first, because we were the first ones to get it. We started this arms race. We have to finish it by leading by example. And we need to get on better terms with our North Korean neighbors, learn about them, let them learn about us, so we can move forward in a constructive and prosperous manner.